A Moby boss was fired from his company until a millionaire came to him with an indecent proposal. Comment what you thought of this story with a rating from 0 to 10 and tell me which city you're watching from. I really want to know if you liked my story and get to know you better, so subscribe to my channel to support my work. I'm counting on your help. The mirrored skyscraper on Park Avenue reflected the last lights of sunset as Ethan Cole emptied his desk drawer for the last time on the 42nd floor. At 38, he had built a financial empire through methods few would dare to question, but which today were leading him straight to the abyss. His hands trembled imperceptibly as he placed the last of his personal items in the cardboard box, trying to maintain his composure under the curious gazes of colleagues pretending to work. The dismissal had been swift and brutal. An internal investigation at Meridian Financial had uncovered irregularities he couldn't cover up this time. 15 years of laundering money for criminal organizations, loans with interest rates bordering on extortion, deals that danced dangerously on the line between legal and criminal. It had all crumbled in a matter of hours, like a house of cards blown down by a sudden, merciless wind. Ethan had grown up in the projects of the Bronx, the son of a woman who cleaned offices just like this one in the dead of night. His mother, Mrs. Gable, always said he was different, that he had a special intelligence, an ability to see opportunities where others saw only obstacles. She wasn't wrong. By 23, he was manipulating numbers with surgical precision, turning shady transactions into seemingly legitimate operations. The money came quickly, along with the power and respect he never had in his childhood. But now, walking towards the elevator with the box in his arms, Ethan felt the weight of every morally questionable choice he had made. His bank accounts had been frozen by the FBI. His credit cards cancelled. The penthouse apartment in the Upper East Side mortgaged to the last penny. Worse still, the criminals he had laundered money for over the years were starting to call in debts and pending favors, and they were not known for their patience or mercy. The phone rang as he reached the ground floor. An unknown number. For a moment, he hesitated to answer, but curiosity overcame fear. A female voice, elegant but cold as ice, spoke on the other end of the line. "Ethan Cole, my name is Dora. I believe we can help each other. I'll be waiting in the abandoned parking garage at 450 West Augusta Street at 2 in the morning. Come alone if you want a solution to your problems." The call ended before he could reply. Ethan stood on the sidewalk, watching the frantic movement of the avenue, trying to process what he had just heard. Who was this woman? How did she know about his situation? And more importantly, what kind of solution could she offer a man being hunted by both the law and the criminal underworld? The next few hours dragged on like an eternity. Ethan spent the afternoon in a cheap motel in the city center, the only place he could afford with the little cash he had in his pocket. Lying on the bed with questionable sheets, he mentally reviewed all the possibilities. It could be a trap by the feds, an attempt to get him to confess to crimes or implicate others. It could be someone sent by his former criminal clients, ready to eliminate him before he became a threat. Or it could be exactly what it seemed, a stranger offering help at the most desperate moment of his life. When the clock struck 1:45 in the morning, Ethan made his decision. He didn't have much to lose anyway. He called a cab and asked to be dropped off a few blocks from the indicated address. He walked through the deserted streets, watching every shadow, every suspicious movement, until he found the abandoned commercial building. The underground parking garage was plunged into almost complete darkness, lit only by a few erratically flickering fluorescent bulbs. She was there, exactly as promised. A middle-aged woman with brown hair tied in a discreet bun, wearing simple clothes that could belong to anyone from the middle class. She was driving a silver sedan, nothing flashy, nothing that could identify her. When Ethan approached, she lowered the window and studied him with intelligent, calculating eyes. "Get in," she said simply. Ethan hesitated for a moment, but then opened the passenger door and sat beside her. The car's interior smelled of discreet perfume and new leather. The woman didn't start the engine, just turned to face him directly. "You're in a very complicated situation, Ethan," she began, her tone a mix of understanding and coldness. "The FBI has enough evidence to prosecute you for money laundering, tax evasion, and criminal association. Your former clients want to eliminate you to prevent you from negotiating a plea bargain, and you don't have the financial resources to flee the country or hide properly." A chill ran down Ethan's spine. This woman knew details that not even his lawyers were aware of. "Who are you?" he asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "Someone who can solve all your problems," she replied without hesitation. "I can pay your debts, guarantee your protection from any threat, and even provide a new identity if necessary. In return, I just need you to agree to marry me." Ethan blinked several times, certain he had misheard. "Marry you? I don't even know your real name." "My real name doesn't matter for now. What matters is that I need a husband for 2 years, and you need protection and resources to start over. It's a business transaction, nothing more." She opened a folder that was on the back seat and handed him some documents. "This is a preliminary contract. Read it carefully before you decide." The pages contained specific details about the proposed agreement. She would pay all his outstanding debts, including the amounts owed to criminals. She would ensure discreet police protection and specialized criminal lawyers. He would receive a new, clean identity, plus a substantial monthly allowance for his personal expenses. In return, he had to play the role of a devoted husband at social events, support her business decisions, and maintain absolute secrecy about the nature of the agreement. "Why me?" Ethan asked, still trying to process the surreal proposition. "Because you're intelligent, used to handling dangerous situations, and most importantly, desperate enough to accept my terms without asking too many questions." She smiled coldly. "Besides, I need someone who understands that certain transactions require absolute discretion." Ethan reread the contract, noting specific clauses about fidelity, public appearances, and the consequences for breaking the confidentiality agreement. It was a cold, calculated deal, but it also represented his only chance of surviving the coming weeks. "And what if I fall in love with you?" he asked, half joking, half testing her reaction. "That would be extremely inconvenient for both of us," she replied without blinking. "Keep in mind that this is a temporary and professional arrangement, nothing more." The silence stretched for a few minutes as Ethan weighed his limited options. Accepting meant giving up any real autonomy for the next 2 years, turning himself into a sort of well-paid employee for this mysterious woman. Refusing meant facing the police, the criminals, and an extremely uncertain future alone. "I accept," he said finally, signing the document with hands that no longer trembled. She took the papers and started the engine. "Excellent. Starting tomorrow, you will be introduced to society as my new husband. I hope you're prepared for a life very different from the one you've known until now." As the car glided through the empty streets of New York in the dead of night, Ethan looked out the window and wondered if he had just signed his sentence of freedom or his certificate of rebirth. Only time would tell if this cold, calculating woman would be his salvation or just another, more sophisticated kind of prison. The mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, loomed before Ethan like a fortress of marble and glass, hidden behind high walls and electronic gates that opened silently as the sedan approached. It was almost 4 in the morning when they arrived, and the property was immersed in a quietness that seemed almost sacred. Ethan had never been in a house so large, so imposing. Every architectural detail screamed ancestral wealth, the kind of fortune accumulated over generations. The woman, who he now knew as Victoria, guided him through the main hall, where a baccarat crystal chandelier hung from the ceiling like a captured constellation. The walls were adorned with works of art Ethan recognized from books and magazines, an original Warhol, some Pollock prints, a bronze sculpture that was probably worth more than he had earned in years of work at Meridian. Everything was perfectly arranged, but there was a coldness to the perfection, as if the house were more a museum than a home. "Your quarters are on the second floor, West Wing," she said, ascending a marble staircase with steps so polished they reflected her footsteps. "You will have complete privacy. I occupy the East Wing. Our routines will rarely intersect, except when necessary to maintain public appearances." Ethan followed her through the silent corridors, observing the portraits that decorated the walls. Men in austere suits and elegant women stared at him from their golden frames, generations of a family that had clearly dominated New York for decades. In some more recent portraits, he recognized Victoria's face next to a tall, distinguished man, both smiling at the camera with a happiness that seemed genuine. "Your husband?" he asked, stopping before a photo where she wore a stunning wedding dress. "Ex-husband," she corrected coldly, "died 3 years ago, helicopter crash." Her voice carried a hardness that didn't match the vulnerability Ethan thought he had glimpsed in her eyes for a brief moment. The room she assigned him was larger than the apartment where he had grown up. A king-size bed dominated the center, flanked by mahogany furniture and a flat-screen television that covered half the wall. The windows offered a magnificent view of the meticulously kept gardens, where water fountains danced among rose bushes that must have cost a fortune to maintain. "Tomorrow, you will be introduced to the staff as my new husband," Victoria continued, handing him a folder. "Read these documents. They contain basic information about my family, businesses, and social commitments for the coming months. You'll need to memorize everything if you want this charade to be convincing." Ethan opened the folder and was faced with a veritable dossier on the life of Victoria Sterling. That was her real name, he discovered. 42 years old, a widow, heiress to a conglomerate that spanned mining, technology, agriculture, and even a television network. Her estimated net worth exceeded $5 billion. She wasn't just rich, she was one of the most powerful people in the country. "Why do you need a fake husband?" he asked, leafing through documents about complex legal battles involving the family inheritance. "A woman with your power could solve any problem." "The power without legitimacy is vulnerable," she replied, adjusting a curtain that was already perfectly aligned. "My brothers-in-law question my ability to manage the family businesses. They claim a lonely widow is emotionally unstable, susceptible to manipulation. A solid marriage removes those arguments and consolidates my position." Ethan sensed there was much more to the story, but he didn't press. The tension in her shoulders, the way she avoided direct eye contact, the way her hands clenched into fists when she mentioned her family. It all pointed to deep wounds that went beyond simple business disputes. "There are specific rules for our cohabitation," Victoria continued, resuming her businesslike tone. "You never enter my quarters without permission. You do not question my business decisions in public. You do not show excessive familiarity during social events. We are a mature, discreet couple, not teenagers in love, and you never discuss the terms of our agreement with third parties." "And what about physical intimacy?" Ethan asked, testing the limits of the situation. "Non-existent," she replied without hesitation. "You may seek female company discreetly, as long as you maintain absolute secrecy. I will do the same if necessary. This is a professional arrangement, not a period romance." Ethan nodded, but something in the rigidity of her posture made him suspect that her coldness was more of an armor than a natural trait. There were moments, when she looked at the portraits of her dead husband, when she mentioned her family, when a deep sadness pierced her mask of control. After she left, Ethan explored his new territory. The walk-in closet was larger than his old office, already stocked with tailored suits in his exact size. In the bathroom, expensive grooming products awaited him, along with prescribed medications in his name from doctors he had never met. The meticulousness of the preparation was impressive and slightly unnerving. He couldn't sleep. He stayed awake, watching the garden through the window, trying to process how his life had changed so radically in a matter of hours. The day before, he was a man on the run, desperate and without prospects. Now he inhabited a mansion that seemed to have sprung from an architectural magazine, married on paper to one of the most influential women in the United States. But the feeling of being in enemy territory persisted. The first few weeks established a strange routine. Ethan would wake up early and find breakfast served on the veranda by the staff, a middle-aged couple who treated him with the deference reserved for the master of the house, but with a distance that made it clear they knew about the artificial nature of the marriage. Victoria had already left for the office by the time he came down, leaving only a detailed schedule of commitments that required his presence. The social events were a revelation. Ethan discovered he had a natural talent for navigating the power games of New York's high society. His experience manipulating complex situations at Meridian translated perfectly to the sophisticated conversations about art, politics, and business that dominated charity dinners and gallery openings. He had memorized not only the information about the Sterling family, but had also educated himself on culture, art history, and international economics. During an event at the Met, he observed Victoria interacting with other entrepreneurs and realized how she was both respected and feared. Powerful men lowered their voices when she approached. Society women greeted her with smiles that didn't reach their eyes. She dominated every conversation without needing to raise her voice, using only the power of her presence and the surgical precision of her words. "You've adapted quickly," she commented on the way home, the first time they had driven together since the night of the agreement. "I thought you'd be intimidated by the environment." "I grew up observing people," Ethan replied. "I learned that power is about perception, not net worth. You project authority naturally. I just compliment your performance." She studied him through the rearview mirror, and he caught a flicker of curiosity in her eyes. "You're not what I expected," she admitted. "Most men in your situation would try to take advantage of the circumstances." "Maybe I still will," he joked, watching her reaction. "I wouldn't recommend it," she replied, but there was an almost imperceptible smile playing at the corners of her mouth. It was during a dinner at their own home, a reception for foreign investors, that Ethan got his first real glimpse of the woman behind the mask. They were hosting about 40 guests in the main hall, and Victoria orchestrated everything with the precision of a maestro. But when she briefly excused herself to check on the kitchen arrangements, Ethan followed and found her leaning against the marble countertop, breathing deeply with her eyes closed. "Is everything all right?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Perfectly," she replied quickly, recomposing herself. "Just checking if the canapes are at the ideal temperature." But Ethan had noticed her hands trembling slightly and the paleness she tried to hide with makeup. "You don't have to pretend with me," he said. "Not when we're alone." "Pretend what?" she asked, but her defense sounded less convincing. "That you're not exhausted, that you don't carry a weight no one should carry alone, that you don't spend sleepless nights trying to keep everything under control." Victoria stared at him for a long moment, as if deciding how much of the truth she could reveal. "You don't understand the pressure," she said finally. "Every decision I make affects thousands of employees. Every mistake can destroy companies that have existed for generations, and everyone is waiting for me to fail." "Why do they expect you to fail?" "Because I'm a woman commanding an empire built by men. Because my husband died under suspicious circumstances, and some believe I had a hand in it. Because my brothers-in-law are convinced that an emotional widow can't make rational decisions. Her voice carried a bitterness that years of therapy had failed to heal. Ethan felt something stir inside him, a genuine desire to protect this woman who projected strength but carried fragility. "Then let's prove them wrong," he said, surprising both of them with the conviction in his voice. Victoria studied him with renewed attention, as if seeing him for the first time. "Why would you do that?" "Because I recognize someone fighting alone when I see one," he replied. "And because, regardless of the terms of our agreement, no one deserves to carry so much alone." At that moment, in the silence of the kitchen, while the dinner party continued in the hall, something fundamental shifted between them. It wasn't love yet, not even admitted attraction, but the mutual recognition of two people who had been forced to become harder than life required, and who might just find relief in an alliance with each other. The change in their dynamic did not go unnoticed by the mansion's staff or the company's executives. During board meetings, Ethan began to accompany Victoria, initially as a silent observer, but gradually offering insights that revealed his sharp understanding of financial markets. His experience with complex, albeit questionable, transactions translated into a valuable perspective on legitimate business. It was during a surprise audit from the Department of Justice that Ethan proved his real worth. The investigators arrived at the company headquarters on a Thursday morning, armed with warrants allowing access to all tax records from the last 5 years. Harrison Sterling, Victoria's brother-in-law and executive vice president, seemed far too nervous for someone who was supposed to be clean. Ethan immediately noticed the signs. The way Harrison avoided eye contact, how his hands sweated when the auditors mentioned certain international operations, how he always positioned himself near the exit during meetings. These were behaviors Ethan recognized from his own days, navigating the line between legality and crime. "He's hiding something," he murmured to Victoria during a break when they were alone in the conference room. "The transaction with the Bolivian mining company he supervised last year, the numbers don't add up." Victoria frowned. "Harrison has been handling those operations for 10 years. He's family, Ethan. I can't just accuse him without concrete evidence." "Then let's find the evidence," Ethan said, his voice carrying the determination of someone who knew exactly how to uncover financial irregularities. "Give me access to the internal systems, 48 hours, and I'll find what he's hiding." For 2 days, Ethan dove into the company's files with a dedication that impressed even the most senior employees. He identified suspicious patterns, transactions routed through unnecessary tax havens, contracts with shell companies that existed only on paper. What he found was worse than he had imagined. Harrison wasn't just embezzling funds from the company. He was purposefully sabotaging some deals to force Victoria to sell her controlling stake. $23 million, Ethan said, presenting the evidence one night as they worked until 3 in the morning in Victoria's office. "Siphoned off over 2 years through phantom consulting firms. He's creating artificial losses to justify that you're not competent to run the company." Victoria studied the documents with a mixture of disbelief and anger. "Harrison was at my wedding. He was supposed to be the godfather to my first child, the one we never had. How could he do this?" "Because 20% of $5 billion is worth more than family loyalty," Ethan replied pragmatically, "and because he probably believes he's entitled to a larger slice of the inheritance." It was the first time Ethan saw Victoria truly vulnerable. She cried that night, not the delicate tears of a fragile woman, but the deep, painful sobs of someone who had been betrayed by one of the few people she still trusted. Ethan didn't try to console her with empty words. He just stayed by her side, offering his silent presence until she managed to compose herself. "What do we do now?" she asked when the tears subsided. "Now you learn how a Sterling deals with betrayal," she replied, And for the first time, Ethan saw the ruthless strength that had turned her family into a dynasty. Harrison is not just my brother-in-law. He committed crimes that could destroy the company's reputation and harm thousands of employees. This will not go unpunished. The confrontation took place in the main boardroom, with all board members present. Victoria presented the evidence methodically, each document duly authenticated, each suspicious transaction explained in technical detail that left no room for dispute. Harrison tried to deny, then to downplay, and finally appealed to family ties. "Victoria, we've been family for 15 years, he pleaded. "Are you believing a stranger over your own brother-in-law?" "I'm believing in evidence," she responded coldly, "and you stopped being family the moment you decided to steal from the company my husband built." The room fell silent as she presented the final piece of evidence. Recordings of phone conversations where Harrison discussed with intermediaries how to accelerate Victoria's removal from the presidency. The words were too clear to be interpreted as anything but conspiracy. Ethan watched it all with a mix of admiration and caution. The woman he had known as Dora, cold but vulnerable, was revealing herself as Victoria Sterling, a ruthless executive capable of destroying careers as easily as she would order coffee. It was simultaneously attractive and terrifying. Harrison was fired that same day, facing not only unemployment, but also criminal charges for embezzlement and conspiracy. The other board members, sensing the shift in power, quickly aligned themselves with Victoria. Some out of fear, others out of renewed respect for her leadership. "You were instrumental in exposing Harrison," Victoria said during dinner that night, the first meal they had shared alone since the fake marriage began. "Without your experience with financial investigations, he would have continued sabotaging the company indefinitely." "It was the least I could do," Ethan replied. "You saved me from an impossible situation. It's only fair that I return the favor when I can." But there was something more in the way she looked at him now, an attention that went beyond professional gratitude. Over the past few weeks, working side by side late into the night, Ethan had noticed small details about Victoria that contradicted her public image. How she always checked if the staff had eaten before dismissing them. How she knew the names of the security guards' children and asked about their families. How she kept photos of retired employees in a special drawer, along with thank you letters she had saved for years. "Can I ask a personal question?" Ethan said, pouring himself more wine. "Depends on how personal," she replied, but her tone was more receptive than defensive. "Why did you never have children with your husband?" The question seemed to hit her like a physical blow. Victoria became very still for a long moment, swirling the wine in her glass between her fingers. "We tried for 5 years, she said finally, 3 miscarriages. The doctors said I had uterine malformations that made it practically impossible to carry a pregnancy to term." "I'm sorry," Ethan said, genuinely touched by the pain she still carried. "Charles wanted to adopt. I was the one who couldn't accept the idea. I was obsessed with proving I could be a biological mother, that my body wasn't defective." Her voice grew softer. "When he died, one of the things that tortured me the most was regret. He would have been a wonderful father." "How did he die?" Ethan asked gently. "Helicopter crash returning from a meeting in Stamford. Adverse weather conditions," the official investigation said. "But I always suspected it wasn't an accident." She looked at him directly. "Charles had discovered irregularities in the family business that I only began to understand years later. Harrison had started his operations long before I imagined." The revelation hit Ethan like a cold wave. "You think Harrison?" "I think my brother-in-law is capable of anything to get what he wants, and that Charles was an obstacle to his plans. Victoria finished her wine in one gulp. I could never prove anything. Harrison is too smart to leave obvious evidence, but the coincidence was too suspicious to ignore. A fury grew inside Ethan, directed not just at Harrison but at everyone who had hurt this woman, who was beginning to matter to him more than the contract allowed. And now, with the evidence we found, maybe it's possible to investigate more deeply. Maybe, she agreed, but her expression showed she had already given up on seeking justice for her husband's death. But that won't bring him back. And it won't erase the years I wasted hesitating about adoption. They finished dinner in contemplative silence, but it was a comfortable silence, the kind that arises between two people who are starting to truly know each other. When they stood up to go to their separate rooms, Victoria stopped at the base of the staircase. "Ethan," she said, her voice carrying an unusual hesitation, "thank you for today, for the investigation, for listening to me." "Thank you," he replied, "for trusting me with this information. I know it isn't easy." For a moment it seemed she might say something more, perhaps take a step toward him. But then the moment passed, and she went up the stairs alone, leaving Ethan in the hall with the feeling that something fundamental had shifted between them, something that went far beyond the cold terms of their marriage contract. Harrison's revenge came in a more brutal and calculated form than anyone could have predicted. 3 months after his dismissal, when Ethan and Victoria had found a comfortable routine of working together and growing confidences, the bomb exploded on the pages of the country's leading financial newspaper. The headline blared in bold letters: "Sterling heiress marries criminal under investigation for money laundering." The article was devastating in its detail. Private investigators hired by Harrison had unearthed every dark aspect of Ethan's past, his connections to criminal organizations, the specific amounts laundered through Meridian Financial, even photographs of him in secret meetings with drug cartel leaders. The text suggested that Victoria had been manipulated by a man experienced in deceiving wealthy people, insinuating that the marriage was part of an elaborate scheme to seize the sterling fortune. Ethan read the article on his iPad during breakfast, his stomach clenching with each paragraph. Victoria entered the veranda just as he finished reading, and from the look on her face, it was obvious she had already seen the news. "My lawyers are preparing an official response," she said, but her voice carried a tension she couldn't hide. "We're going to sue for defamation and invasion of privacy." "Victoria," Ethan began, but she cut him off with a gesture. "No, we're not discussing this now. I have an emergency board meeting in an hour, and I need to prepare to minimize the damage to the company." But the damage was already done. During the meeting, which Ethan attended via video conference, board members expressed open concerns about Victoria's ability to continue leading the company while facing this scandal. The stock price had plummeted 15% at market open. Major clients cancelled contracts. The tabloid press began to speculate about other sordid aspects of their personal lives. "The situation is untenable," declared the oldest board member, a 70-year-old man who had known Victoria's father. "Regardless of the truth of the accusations, public perception is compromising our credibility in the market." "Are you suggesting I divorce my husband to protect the company?" Victoria asked, her voice dangerously low. "We are suggesting that you consider all available options to preserve the interests of the shareholders," another board member replied diplomatically. Ethan watched Victoria throughout the meeting, seeing her torn between her growing personal loyalty to him and her responsibility to the company that represented her family's legacy. When the video conference ended, they were left alone in the office, the silence hanging between them like a guillotine about to fall. "You need to leave me," Ethan said finally, surprising her with his frankness. "Publicly, officially. It's the only way to save your reputation and the company." "No," Victoria replied immediately. "I will not reward Harrison's blackmail by destroying our our arrangement. Our arrangement? Ethan smiled sadly. Victoria, it stopped being just an arrangement a long time ago, and we both know it. The confession hung in the air between them. In recent weeks, especially after the revelations about Harrison and the confidences about her dead husband, they had crossed every line established by the original contract. They didn't sleep together yet, but they shared intimate meals, conversations that lasted until dawn, moments of closeness that went far beyond the pretense needed for public events. "Ethan," she began, but was interrupted by the urgent arrival of her head of security. "Mrs. Sterling, we have a problem," the man said, clearly agitated. "The FBI has just arrived with search and seizure warrants. They're investigating a possible conspiracy between you and Mr. Cole to launder money through the company." The operation was humiliating and devastating. Federal agents ransacked the mansion, confiscating computers, documents, even personal items that could contain evidence of financial crimes. Ethan was temporarily arrested for questioning, while Victoria faced hours of interrogation about her motives for marrying a known criminal. During the 5 days Ethan was detained, Victoria discovered the true cost of loving someone publicly rejected by society. Long-time employees resigned, business partners suspended negotiations, the press camped in front of the mansion, turning every departure into a spectacle of flashes and shouted questions about her involvement with the criminal husband. Worse still were the pressures from her own family. Uncles and cousins who rarely commented on the company's business suddenly appeared, demanding she resign from the presidency before she completely destroyed the Sterling name. Charles's mother, her former mother-in-law, gave a devastating television interview suggesting that Victoria had dishonored her son's memory by marrying a lowlife. "She was always emotionally unstable," the woman declared to the reporter. "My son tried to protect her from her own impulsive decisions. If he were alive, he would never have allowed this disgrace." It was watching this interview, alone in the empty mansion's living room, that Victoria finally understood the real price of love. It wasn't just the company's free-falling stock or the cancelled contracts. It was the absolute loneliness of choosing someone against the judgment of the entire world she knew, including people she considered family. When Ethan was released, he found a woman transformed by the pressure. Victoria had lost visible weight, developed deep dark circles under her eyes, and a constant tension in her shoulders that made her seem as if she were always bracing for the next attack. They hugged in the mansion's hall, a desperate embrace of two people who had almost lost each other. "I'm leaving," Ethan said that night, after the lawyers confirmed that the charges against him would stick and a public trial was inevitable. "I'll disappear. You can claim you were deceived, that you only found out about my past after the investigations. Your reputation can be salvaged." "And what if I don't want you to leave?" "Then you'll be destroyed along with me," he answered honestly. "Victoria, I love you. I'm admitting it now when it no longer matters. But precisely because I love you, I can't let you sacrifice everything for me." "I love you too," she confessed, the words escaping like an open wound. "And that makes everything more impossible, not easier." They spent that last night together, finally consummating the relationship that had been growing for months. It was a night of desperation and passion, knowing it would also be a farewell. They made love like two people trying to memorize every touch, every sensation, to carry with them during the impending separation. The next morning, Ethan left discreetly, taking only a small suitcase and a new identity document that Victoria's contacts had arranged. She publicly announced that she had been deceived and manipulated by a man experienced in seducing wealthy women, filing for divorce, and promising to cooperate fully with the investigations. The strategy worked. Slowly, public sympathy returned to Victoria, now portrayed as a vulnerable widow who had fallen victim to a sophisticated con artist. The company's stock recovered. The cancelled contracts were renegotiated. The sterling reputation was restored, more solid than before. But the victory tasted bitter. Victoria had saved the company at the cost of the only genuine relationship she had had since her husband's death. For the next 6 months, she functioned like an efficient automaton, making brilliant business decisions while her personal life withered in a solitude that seemed deeper than before. It was while investigating anomalies in the company's accounts to ensure there were no more surprises like Harrison that Victoria made a discovery that changed everything. In old files that had been overlooked during previous audits, she found irrefutable evidence that Harrison had not only embezzled money, but had also orchestrated the helicopter accident that killed Charles. Detailed emails described how he had bribed the mechanic responsible for the aircraft's maintenance to sabotage it. Bank transfers showed payments to the pilot who had died in the crash, ensuring his eternal silence. Recordings of conversations revealed that Harrison had planned his brother-in-law's death for over 3 years, patiently waiting for the perfect opportunity. More importantly, the evidence proved that many of the accusations against Ethan had been exaggerated or fabricated. Although he had indeed laundered money, the amounts were smaller than alleged, and several of the more serious criminal operations had been invented by private investigators paid by Harrison. With this information, Victoria not only prosecuted Harrison for murder, but also managed to significantly clear Ethan's name. The man she loved was not the saint he pretended to be in the marriage contract, but he wasn't the demon portrayed by the media either. Determined to right the wrongs that social pressure had forced her to commit, Victoria personally boarded a plane to Montana, where her investigators had located Ethan working as an accountant on a soybean farm. The reunion happened during an epic thunderstorm, with her showing up soaked on the doorstep of his simple house in the middle of the fields. "I've come for my husband," she said, rain streaming down her face as he stared at her in disbelief. "Your husband left 6 months ago," Ethan replied. "The man who is here is just someone trying to start over." "Then I'm here to start over too. With me. With us." They spent the entire night talking, he telling her about the months of isolation and physical labor that had helped him find a peace he had never known in New York. She admitting she had sacrificed love for the approval of people who, in the end, didn't really matter. They reconciled first emotionally, then physically, rediscovering each other without the pressures and artifices that had defined their initial relationship. The return to New York marked not a new beginning, but a complete transformation. Ethan returned not as the hired husband of a business deal, but as the chosen partner of a woman who had finally learned to value her own happiness above public opinion. Together, they transformed the Sterling Corporation into a force for social change, implementing programs for social responsibility and financial transparency that became a model for other corporations. Victoria never managed to get pregnant, but they adopted 2 children, an 8-year-old boy and a 5-year-old girl, both orphans whose parents had died in work-related accidents at companies subcontracted by Sterling. It was a way to honor not only their desire for parenthood, but also to take responsibility for the family's past business mistakes. 5 years later, Ethan watched Victoria playing in the garden with their children, the same garden where he had spent his first sleepless night in the mansion. She was laughing in a way he had never seen during the months of the fake marriage, a genuine, free laugh from a woman who had finally learned that true love is worth any sacrifice, but that the best sacrifices are those made by choice, not by pressure. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, approaching him on the veranda. "About how we got here," he replied, pulling her into his arms. two desperate strangers who made a business deal and ended up discovering that the best transactions are the ones where both sides gain more than they expected. "Very romantic, Mr. Cole," she teased, but her eyes shone with the happiness of a woman who had found not just love, but redemption. They stood there watching the children, two former criminals, he from the financial world, she from the emotional one, who had learned that true power comes not from controlling others, but from consciously choosing to surrender to someone who deserves that surrender. The Sterling Empire continued to thrive, but now it served a purpose greater than the mere accumulation of wealth. And the marriage that had begun as theater had transformed into the most genuine of partnerships, built on brutal honesty, mutual forgiveness, and the courage to choose love, even when the entire world suggests otherwise. If you enjoyed this video, please subscribe to my channel. I promise to bring you videos every day that will make your life happier. Comment what you thought of my story with a rating from 0 to 10, and thank you very much.